Hi everyone. So today, and this is my very first time or video actually doing this, I recently purchased a 2022 Jeep Wrangler Rubicon 4xE. Part of the reason that I purchased the vehicle was while my wife and I and a couple of friends were actually out in Wyoming, rented one as a rental car for a week, and fell in love with the powertrain. My primary experience or background is actually in Toyotas. I've had three Toyota 4Runner 4th gens V8 four-wheel drives. I've had two GX 470s as well as a Land Cruiser 200 series. I won't call it the LX 570, even though that's what it is, because I completely gutted the suspension and lifted it myself. Um, but I hope that helps to provide some level of context. Now, as far as transitioning from a 200,000 mile Lexus product where you have no concerns in the world over to a 2022 Jeep Wrangler where you're seeing recalls where they are inevitably catching on fire in your garage is a bit of a transition. And it's one that a lot of the community, car community in general, doesn't see in a positive light. The shift in complexity from very simple to extremely complex has been a super sore subject. And then having an electrification on top of that makes for an even more convoluted conversation, I think, than anything else. Uh, I'm going to go ahead and dive into my 4xE. The intention of this video is really to serve as like a basis for how exactly all this stuff works. There's a lot of misinformation out there, even in reading through forums, talking with different people, etc., where there's really not very well known info out there. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and dive in. And I did actually do like a formal presentation, if you will. All right, so first and foremost, the JL Wrangler. So the JL Wrangler started, I think it was the second half of 2018 for that model year. The JL Wrangler is offered in a two-door and a four-door. As of right now, there are actually 5 powertrains that are offered in that Wrangler. The first one is the 3.6 Pentastar. That is probably the most old faithful, reliable engine that they have. If I was to compare it to a Toyota product, it would be the 4-liter that's currently found in the Toyota 4Runner, leading up to the 2025 model year. The next one to talk about, one more note on the Pentastar. It has 285 horsepower, 260 foot-pounds of torque. For the second one, there is a 2-liter inline 4-cylinder called the GME T4. The reason that I'm noting the engine code, if you will, is Stellantis, the parent company to Jeep Wrangler or to Jeep and Chrysler and all that, actually owns Alfa Romeo. They own Maserati. They own a plethora of other products as well. Within each one of those baseline models, including like, the Alfa Romeo Stelvio, my father-in-law has one. The maybe it was like a Chrysler 300. I'm probably wrong on that. Anyways, any of these engines that are available that are the 2-liter are that same GME T4. In general, that 2-liter 4-cylinder is actually a pretty darn good engine that not many people have had much reported issues with. As far as output, that engine produces 270 horsepower and 295 foot-pounds of torque. So it's a pretty powerful little engine, as is the V6. The next one I want to hit is the EcoDiesel. Now, the EcoDiesel didn't actually start production until the 2020 model year. It produces 260 horsepower and 442 foot-pounds of torque. That's a lot of torque, but diesels also are known for lower horsepower and being able to produce a lot of torque at lower RPMs. The EcoDiesels have been produced in 3 generations. I believe the 3rd gen EcoDiesel is the only one that has ever been offered in the Wrangler. In general, they are decent engines. There are some reported issues and failures. They're definitely not bulletproof. If you compare it to like a 3-liter Duramax or even some of the other competitor engines that are out there, I don't know that I would take the 3-liter EcoDiesel over those, but it is nice to see that it's available. Now, the next one I'll mention is the 392. This will be the only instance throughout this entire kind of video that I actually mention the 392. Not because I don't love it, I don't respect it. It's due to the price. The prices on these 392s are generally over $80,000, at least in terms of what I was looking at. Because of that, it just ruled me out. I really had zero interest in it. The 392 started for the 2021 model year. They offer 470 horsepower, 470 foot-pounds of torque, and a sub 5 second 0 to 60. If you're going to buy a Wrangler and money is no object, you buy a 392. End of story. That I think anyone would agree with me on that statement. Now, last but not least is the Wrangler 4xE hybrid. This is the engine that I chose, so I'll go ahead and preface it. Obviously, I'm going to be a little bit biased. The 4xE is the 2-liter turbo that is actually working with a hybrid powertrain. It produces 375 horsepower and 470 foot-pounds of torque. It is actually the same amount of torque as what I just mentioned with the 392. As far as model years, they started the 4xE in the 2021 model year. All right, I'm going to go ahead and transition a little bit to what exactly is the 4xE? How exactly does this work? This is where a lot of the misinformation kind of comes in. First and foremost, what is a hybrid? A hybrid is a gasoline engine working in unison with an electric powertrain. Theoretically, you could have really two powertrains that are just working in unison together. So a hybrid theoretically could be petrol or gasoline working with a diesel. That'll never happen, but it is just the combination of two different types of powertrains. Now, as far as how hybrids work, there are really two approaches that manufacturers are taking these days. The first one is actually going to be fuel efficiency. So things like a Prius, when you think of it. They're going to be able to achieve 50 miles per gallon. They're going to have adequate power, but they're not necessarily geared towards it. So that's the first one. That's probably what you think of when you think of a mild hybrid system. The second one is gearing vehicles towards performance. And we saw this as far back as, 2013, 2015, somewhere in that range, when, and please don't hate me, the McLaren P1 and the Porsche 918 just the Porsche 918 came out. When they came out, they were looked at as being strange because they actually leveraged a small battery to achieve a hybrid powertrain. Where the hybridization really helps is in these turbocharged applications. So where you have a turbo engine, they're able to fill in the low-end torque so that you actually don't have any turbo lag in these vehicles. Vehicles nowadays are generally taken on one of those two approaches. Another really common one that we see, or another car that has just been developed that kind of leverages that secondary approach, is the Toyota Land Cruiser 250 series that's actually using the 2.4 liter hybrid iForce Max engine. It's a great engine. Again, it's a matter of applying hybridization in a way that actually helps to produce additional power. It helps for towing, it helps to reduce load on the engine, etc. All right, so now let's go ahead and hit specifically on where the 4xE hits. A Jeep is a horribly non-aerodynamic car. Anyone that tries to argue that you're buying a Jeep for the sake of getting decent fuel economy is just flat out wrong. It will never be impressive. It can be better than, say a 4-liter was back in the late 90s, but it's still a moving brick through the wind. Aerodynamics don't work in a conducive way that allow a moving brick to be aerodynamic. That's not how it works. That said, the approach that they took on the 4xE was really more of that Land Cruiser approach. It was a hybridization where you're able to allocate power in terms of, you're able to allocate power in new ways by leveraging that electric technology. The 4xE uses that 2-liter turbo, combines it with 2 electric motors. Yes, I know that's extremely complex. Those electric motors, and we'll go ahead and dive into them. You have one that is found in the transmission. By the way, that is a ZF 8-speed transmission. This specific trans is called the ZF 8HP70. I had to go and do a lot of research because actually this isn't noted really anywhere. That transmission is actually found in a plethora of other cars, such as the Panamera hybrids, the Cayenne, Rolls-Royce Phantom, and the VW Touareg. So obviously we're seeing it used in a lot of the European vehicles. It's also used in like the Jeep EcoDiesel does use it. The transmission output for that specific motor, and it's actually embedded into the transmission, is 120 horsepower and 184 foot-pounds of torque. The reason I'm bringing in those numbers, if you add that to the original 270 and 295 that the 2-liter produces, you're already at over what the Wrangler is actually producing. You're at 390 horsepower and 479 foot-pounds of torque. A little bit interesting. Now, there's a secondary motor. The secondary motor is actually called a P1 motor generator. I'll get into and I'll actually provide a link. There's a guy on YouTube that did a decent breakdown. I think it was like Jeep 4xE enthusiast or something like that. That P1 motor generator is directly applied to the front crankshaft of the engine. It works in 2 ways. I keep holding up fingers like you can tell. It produces 62 horsepower and 39 foot-pounds of torque. So add that on. I'll do the math in a second. What is the purpose of having this attached to the front side of the motor? Well, the 2-liter turbo, at least in the 4xE application, does not have a starter. This motor generator actually works as the starter that can turn over the engine and crank it on. Next, it's able to regenerate, and this is where the generator fits in. It regenerates power back to the battery directly from the engine. When you have these hybrids, if you're not plugging it into a wall, we'll get into that plug-in in a minute, but if you're not plugging it into a wall, you have to be able to allocate power back to the battery, otherwise it could potentially go dead. Sometimes you can use brake regen, but it's oftentimes not enough. What the car will do is it'll automatically apply charge to the battery directly from the engine. Yes, that's technically a parasitic draw, but it would apply pressure from the engine directly back into the battery just to keep it at that constant level that it needs to be at in order to be healthy. Lastly, when you have it on the front of the engine, it is able to help reduce the turbo lag that you have. So when you have a turbo engine, you have to build up boost in order for it to, have the maximum amount of power. Well, rather than waiting for that boost to actually be applied, the electric motor can come in before that, and then you have the turbo that's able to reapply or apply the additional power to it. All right, so with those 2 motors in place, the theoretical maximum of power, or theoretical power, is 450 horsepower and 518 pound-feet of torque. It's a lot of power. And Jeep actually had to tone it back because it is so much power. I actually have a little Q&A at the end, and I'll go into that in a moment. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is plug-in. So plugging in is optional in the 4xE. Don't care what you read or who says what, doesn't really matter. It is optional. Especially right now where we have a recall saying that we're not actually allowed to charge it as we want to. If you plug it in, the Wrangler can be driven between 20 and 24 miles, at least is my experience. What I will say is the higher the speed, once you really get above about 50, you're actually better off just engaging the e-save button found in your car. You're dealing with aerodynamics issues. The EV mode really works well if you're going under 50. If you're going over, it's pretty bad. Now, as far as the battery size, and I wrote down a couple of different sizes here just for references. The Toyota Prius uses a 1.3 kilowatt hour battery. Okay. The Wrangler uses one that is 17.3 kilowatt hours. So obviously it's much bigger than a Prius, but a Prius is also an aerodynamic car, so you can see that. A Tesla Model 3 short range uses a 60 kilowatt hour battery. Again, that is almost 4 times the size of the battery that's found in the Wrangler. Part of why we're only getting 20 to 25 miles on it. Now, I wanted to go ahead and throw in a couple of the big boys or competitors. So you have the Rivian R1T. That actually has almost 100 kilowatt hour battery at 92.5. And then you have, this one's just a joke. The Hummer EV uses one that is 205 kilowatt hours. So that's what? 10 times roughly, even more than the one that's actually in our cars. And I think the Hummer EV can only go 200 miles, 250 miles. They're just horribly inefficient cars that weigh like 8,000 pounds. There's a magical balance in here. I personally think that the hybrid kind of finds it. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is the charging time. I personally, when I was charging, was plugging into 110 volt. It takes about 12 to 14 hours to fully charge it. If you're plugging into a 220 and you have a level 2 charger in your house, it's going to take like 2 to 3 hours. It's pretty quick. Personally, in the future, once the car is fixed, I would love to be able to install a level 2 because being able to drive all around town on just pure EV would be very nice when I want it. Now, the next thing that I want to cover, and this is like the next major point, is lifestyle. So for me personally, I work from home. My commute when I go do things is generally between 5 and 10 miles from my house. So that 20 to 25 mile range perfectly suits my needs. I do enjoy off-roading. I do it a few times a year. I don't do it a crazy amount, probably 3 to 5 a year if I had to guess. I do have a boat. My boat weighs approximately 4,000 pounds. Just to generally note. But that's kind of my lifestyle. So I need something that's able to do everything in there, be reasonably comfortable, and I want it to look good as well. And be modifiable just like any Toyota Jeep person would. All right. So with this lifestyle one, I actually went through a few baseline questions because nobody in the internet has really been able to break this down. So first and foremost, are you a car guy? Do you genuinely enjoy having a large amount of torque that is available? If the answer is yes, you would probably appreciate the Eco Diesel or the 4xE. If you don't care, please do yourself a favor. Get the 3.6 liter, own it for 20 years because it's going to be the modern day 4 liter. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with me on that. Again, we're not hitting on 392. I don't have $80,000. Next, how far are you driving on a day-to-day basis? If you're driving between 5 and 30 miles per day, a 4xE makes sense. It's a great car. If you're going between 30 and 100 miles a day, and this may be more like 30 to 60, 30 to 50, somewhere in that range, I would look at a 2 liter or a 3.6 would be my personal vote, unless you have a place to charge halfway through the day. We'll get into why that's important in a moment. If you're going 70 plus miles a day, this isn't even a debate, please go buy an Eco Diesel. Diesels are great on the road. They're great for covering long distances. And contrary to what any diesel person is going to tell me, diesels are fantastic, but they are really made to cover distances and maintain constant load. That's what they were designed for 80 years ago. That's still the basis for why they exist. If you're going to cover a lot of miles, Eco Diesel's the best way. Part of the reason I say that, you're going to get like 29 to 32 mpg, which frankly in a Wrangler is fantastic. I think the 2 liter is like 22 and the 3.6 is like 20. So again, I would highly emphasize those. All right, next. Is the majority of your driving highway or city? I hit on this a moment ago. If all of your driving is highway, do not buy a 4xE. Your gas mileage is not great on the highway. I did a trip from Atlanta to Tuscaloosa, Alabama last weekend. I got 19.5 miles per gallon. I did have a full charge when I left. It's not good on the 4xE on road trips. You should know that. EcoDiesel is going to be the most efficient. If you want something that's going to last the longest, again, I would probably throw out the 3.6. 2 liters, not a bad engine, but if you just want it to go a long way, 3.6. All right. Next, do you have a garage or place to store it? If you don't, EcoDiesel if you want the torque. If you do, 4xE. Reason is, if you can't plug it in, you're probably better suited for an EcoDiesel. Do you need the ability to tow? Similar to the highway question. If you are towing 100 feet, 4xE is beautiful. I tow my boat probably a mile. It's not very far. 4xE is perfect for me. It can pull the boat in and out of the water. Don't need anything more. If you need to tow it more than that, frankly, you probably shouldn't have a Jeep. But if you do, EcoDiesel, not even a debate. They put it in, the Grand Cherokee and other vehicles that can tow a lot more. It just makes more sense. Next, how often do you off-road? As I already said, I off-road a couple of times a year, maybe 4 or 5 times max. For me, the 4xE makes sense. I'm not doing crazy water crossings. I'm not doing things that would be insane. I intend to engage the lockers. I intend to, push it a little bit, but I'm not one of these guys that's going to be putting 40s on my car. That's not me. If you go every weekend, I would recommend the 3.6. I would not do the EcoDiesel. Again, it's fine. It would do it, and any of the EcoDiesel guys are going to disagree with me. The constant low range, low in torque would be fantastic off-road. It's more so that it's a lot of very short runs generally when you do go. That said, 3.6. All right. So I then asked the question, why is a 4xE not ideal if you're averaging over 30 miles? I already hit on this with the gas mileage just not being good. Hybrids just are not, they're great in town. They're not great on the highway. It's not where they really succeed. The primary reason for this is actually due to the weight. So I've seen a range of different weights for the 4xE. I want to say it's like 53 or 5,400 pounds, whereas the EcoDiesel, which is a heavier engine than like the 2-liter or the V6, is going to weigh like 5,000. The 3.6 weighs like 4,600 pounds. So again, it's just a considerably lighter car. They're able to achieve better fuel economy, and they're just better on the road, period. All right. Last but not least, just a few Q&A questions that I've seen come up in the forums. How frequently can I plug in? Will charging too much hurt the battery? These batteries are covered under a 10-year warranty by Jeep. I wouldn't worry about it. Plug it in as much as you want. If you intend to own the car for 30 years, you may be replacing the battery in 10 years, and it'll probably be a $3,000 or $4,000 battery. They will not cost $10,000 like they currently do. That's a fact. Once you start failing, just like Prius batteries, they're going to end up being a couple of grand to fix. It's not going to be a big deal. When I did charge it, I charged it every single night in the garage, and if I got home in the middle of the day and it was at 10%, I'd go ahead and throw it on the charger, get it back up to 60 or 70, take it back out and do it again that night. No issue at all. Next, if the theoretical tuning limit is 450 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque, why is the Wrangler 4xE, only at 375 horsepower, 470 foot-pounds of torque? If you're asking this question, you're probably under 25 years old, and you're asking why we don't go after maximum power numbers. A Mustang 5.0 is capable of 500 or 600 easy. Ford knocks that down to 450 or whatever the power number is in order to stay reliable. The basis for all of these companies to be successful with these cars is not to try and achieve the absolute maximum number possible. Case in point on the 4xE. If you floor it from a dig and you haven't done any of the criteria I'm about to lay out, there's actually a torque limiter in 2 high that will prevent you from really having all that much power in first or second gear. Power from like 25, 30 miles an hour to 60 is stupid in the 4xE. Power from 0 to 20 is pathetic at best. It's because they actually reduce the amount of power that's available in the transmission to try and make it as reliable as possible. They don't want to be blowing these things up like Wrangler 392s, where you have axles actually breaking because it just can't sustain the amount of torque that the engine is outputting. All right, next one. This is a fun one. How can I achieve the fastest 0 to 60? How did Car and Driver achieve a 5.5 second 0 to 60 in a 5,400 pound Wrangler 4xE? I actually did quite a bit of testing on this one. And I can say I've gotten it down to about 5.9 in my 2022 Rubicon. And I don't think there's any more left in the tank at that. And that was going slightly down a hill. So like, I genuinely don't think 5.5 is realistic. I'm also at sea level. But if you want to do it, A, make sure that the battery has some level of charge. I wrote down greater than 20%. It may work with less. I would just have it topped off and make sure that you have power. You're going to need it when you're trying to ask for it. Shift the transfer case from 2 high to 4 auto. As I mentioned a moment ago with the torque limiter, you will actually be getting all of the power in 4-wheel drive versus having it in just 2. That's how they engineered it. Next, shift the transmission to manual. This will automatically kick on the engine. Once the engine is actually kicked on, allow it to warm up if it's not already warmed up. Do not do this on a cold engine. It's not good for it. And then you're going to complain about the reliability. Nobody wants that. Next, and I'll probably get some hate for this one, brake stand it and apply medium throttle. I personally found success at about 2,600 RPMs in doing my release. Next, release the brake and shift back to drive. I tried doing this a couple of times, actually keeping it in manual mode. The issue that I ran into, and maybe others won't, is that the transmission is extremely slow to react when you're pulling back on that gear lever. It took, a second or two for it to think about the shift that I was telling it to make, versus if you put it in drive, it will automatically figure its stuff out. So again, have battery charge, shift it to 4 auto, manual mode, brake stand, 2,500 RPMs, release the brake, and shift back to D as you start moving. It is quick. It is fun. If this gets any form of traction, I'll go ahead and go through another video walking either how-tos of things that I've done, off-road prowess, how I've enjoyed it. In general, I've loved having the 4xE. It's a transition from a GX or 4Runner or any of the Toyota products. But I can genuinely say that it's been fun to own. I hope to do it again in the future. And I hope other people find this helpful. Thank you.